Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. Or rather, good morning. So we'll just get started here real quick. Apologies for being late. I was watching a full Ways and Means and lost track of time. So we just start off real quick with just the welcome folks. Just could put in the chat their name and pronouns, and then we'll just go ahead and jump right into it. For the folks that are participating as attendees, you just put your name, pronouns, and where you're from. And then for task force members, you just say name, pronouns, and what you're looking forward to doing this weekend. So I'll go first. Hoyt, he, him, his, ED of the Oregon Just Transition Alliance. I am looking forward to this weekend. Just hanging out. It's Father's Day this weekend, so I'm gonna go see my old man. Maybe get on the grill a little bit and mess with him, you know? No, I'm excited. But yeah, hang out with my dad for a bit for Father's Day. And I'll pass it to Bob. You're on mute, Bob.
I have to listen to myself twice. Bob Collin, Vice Chair, he, him, his. Looking forward to getting my garden in at summer solstice and hoping that that will make something grow this year. I'll pass it over to Courtney, if she's there. If not, Quinn is fine.
I'm here.
Okay.
Hey. Courtney, she, her, hers. I am looking for possibly going to the river with my sister-in-law this weekend. I don't know where, but she has a spot and I love it. So I will pass it on to Quinn.
Good morning. My name is Quinn Reed. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm looking forward to, I'm actually road tripping with one of my dear friends who is leaving the beautiful state of Oregon for Colorado for a new job. So looking forward to seeing some scenery. First travel in over a year, really. So pretty exciting. Yeah. And I'll pass it to Valentin.
Yeah. Good morning. Valentin Sanchez with the Oregon Law Center, pronouns he, him, and.
And to be honest with you, I don't think I'm looking forward to anything. We're in the process of moving and we keep, pulling out boxes and boxes from the house. And it seems like nothing has been moved out of the house. I don't know how we're going to do it, but, we got to finish packing and get everything out of the house. And I'll pass it over to Jean.
Hi, this is Jim. He, his. I guess I'm looking forward to a neighborhood potluck. We've not had one for quite a while, so getting together with all the neighbors and seeing what's happened in the last 16, 17 months with everybody. So gonna be fun. Looking forward to getting back together with human beings again. That's the best part of this whole deal. I'll pass it on to Amira.
Good morning, everyone. Amira Streeter here, she, her, pronouns, and I am looking forward to also getting together with friends tomorrow night.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate y'all sharing. Exciting weekend. So I know we've got some things on our agenda, but I'm looking at the attendee list right now, and I just want to make sure that if any agency folks didn't have a chance to share yesterday, I'd be happy to have y'all come in here with us and give us an update. Okay. Well, let us know if you do on the chat, or let them here know. So with that, we've got a few things on our agenda today. We've got emerging issues. We'll have an opportunity to hear from some public comment, take a little break. We'll talk about EJTF business, and then we'll close out. So we're here till, we have something scheduled till 12, but we'll most likely end a little early. But let's just hop right in with emerging issues. Do you have anything particular for that, Amira?
Yes. So this is, I had put just emerging issues on the agenda in case there was anything coming up for you all that you want to share with the group, and maybe set up a time to discuss that further. Usually we get presenters who are interested in addressing the task force, but we didn't get that this time. So it's kind of open forum for the work that you all are working on, and if there are any emerging issues in your region as well that the public should be aware of.
Thanks for that, Amira. Anyone want to kick us off? Go ahead, Quinn.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would flag for this group, and I brought it up via email, and I mostly raise it here just because I think it'd be nice to have some discussion at a future meeting, perhaps with someone who has been more deeply involved in the issue. But I've been working and have been, at least more directly involved of late with what's happening on the lower Snake River related to dam removals, and a lot of congressional proposals to address taking out the dams. You're working on a just transition for those folks that are dependent upon the dams, restoring tribal rights, recognizing treaty rights, all of these things. So a lot going on there. For those of you who don't know, I'm Representative Simpson from Idaho, put forward quite a comprehensive legislative proposal that would have resulted in breaching the dams. And that part of it was exciting. The part that was concerning were the elements that might have had negative impacts for EJ communities, particularly related to suspensions of the Clean Water Act, NEPA, ESA, at the same time that it provided more funding for certain activities that could be polluting. So I'm just wanting to take a closer look at that and get a better sense of, the regional approach to, coming up with an alternative proposal. My understanding now is that Representative Simpson's proposal is not going to be moving forward, but I've heard, from multiple governors in this area that there's interest in some sort of collaborative multi-stakeholder process. So just something we should be involved in to make sure that those environmental justice issues are addressed and don't go under the radar. And I feel like with the initial proposal, perhaps that was happening.
This is Jim. I have an emerging issue that I think is going to grow over the years. And one of that is the Biden administration's rush to build new transmission to get renewable energy to market. As you know, like out here, I'm one of the group that are dealing with a 300-mile, 500 kV transmission line that they're trying to put in. We've been there for 5 years, and we'll probably be there for another 5. But within the push for renewable energy, transmission seems to be the answer everybody has to get these renewables to markets. Within that, at the Oregon Department of Energy, there's rulemaking on protected areas, protected resources, also looking at how they site energy facilities, because they're looking at transmission lines as linear facilities and therefore have a set of rules that are a bit different than wind farms or solar farms. So we'll have to be looking at that. And OPUC is in the middle of rulemaking on condemnation. And that's coming back in after a year's hiatus. So as we look at new transmission, we look at taking people's land if they don't agree to allow the line to go through their property for the right of way. So I sense just our group, we have 800 people from Eastern Oregon as members. We're part of a coalition nationally of people in 8 states fighting transmission lines in the Midwest and the East Coast. And like all issues, it's about right siting. It needs to happen, but it needs to happen in a way that is thoughtful and not willy-nilly. And as we talk to people, we're engaged with Merkley, we're engaged with Wyden, talking to them about how are they going to look at doing that? How are you going to reconductor and fire harden existing transmission lines to get more capacity before you go out about building new? And how do you look more at maybe changing from a direct current system, from an alternating current system to a direct current system? And we'll be seeing some of those discussions occur. So there's a lot of money coming out on that. There's going to be a big push for it, but I think it's going to create issues and environmental justice issues like highways, transmission lines, a lot of times go through neighborhoods of people that are less able to defend themselves to what's coming at them. So we've got manuals for ODOE, manuals for OPUC. So we're gearing up for that. Just to let you know, I see that as a biggie. That's one of the biggies that are coming up as we go to our renewable energy push.
This is Bob. I wanted to raise an issue since I was representing EJTF in it. When the natural resource agencies were meeting on climate changes on vulnerable communities as part of fulfilling the second prong of the governor's executive order 20-04. Amira was our guiding light in all that. And the agencies worked hard to figure out what those impacts would be, probably ahead of themselves in terms of seeking first how to address them without really us knowing what they were. So it was very difficult for these brave agency folks to do it. Amira did a survey. We learned an awful lot that will help us. And they're in the same position with climate change EJ was with EJTF 10 years ago. They're meeting together, trying to see what will work with one another. I sense a lot more collaboration. So I wanted to alert you to that because that's where I've been spending my time with you, with this group. And I think it was part of some of Senate Bill 286 at one point. I don't know if it's still in there. And I hope it continues. It's a future version of us in some ways as it moves forward. They did amazing work. We're all probably going to be a little wrong because it's so new. And it's a big risk for state agency people to risk being wrong. It's a very big risk. And they took some risk with this and were very candid and thoughtful and honest. So I think that when that becomes a more engaging process, I would hope EJTF would have a more meshing with that group. But I'll let Amira, if she wants to, speak to that. Thank you.
I do want to, Bob, thank you for bringing it up. So yes, as Bob had mentioned about the survey and compiling that information together into a report, that is still the plan. We're just trying to finalize when exactly that report should be published. It's been a really crazy year, so we're trying to shoot for either sometime in July, early August at the latest. And that group was part of Senate Bill 286. It was going to be continued in some way with support from the agencies. And now I think we probably just have to rethink how to continue that work and what that potentially could look like, at least during the governor's tenure.
Thanks for that. I've been reading a lot more about and just thinking a lot more about this movement to give land back to indigenous peoples. Last summer, the Supreme Court ruled that about half of Oklahoma is Native American land, which doesn't necessarily take land away from landowners. It's more so having to do with the jurisdiction of the land. And I think one of the serious things that we've had to deal with as EJ advocates has been that the ruling, whoever's governing the land, the governance of the land, which typically has been cities, counties, states, the federal government, has not been sufficient enough to protect the land. But in areas of our country in which lands are governed by the tribes, their approaches to different things are much different. So really just been thinking about and looking at what they did in Oklahoma, the Supreme Court decision, and its consequences on the governance of that land. And just on a personal note, you know, through my organization, EJTF, we will be hiring a person to be a liaison with tribes and building deeper relationships after the legislative session. But I think up until now, it's been really difficult for EJTF, I know, to engage with Oregon's tribes. I know that as advocates, it's really difficult. It's difficult work to do. So I'm excited to invest in that through my own organization and see what that comes about. But I'd like for it to be something that we also engage with and talk about more as an EJTF, because I've been on the EJTF for over 4 years now, and I don't think I've once heard from or we've had a session with any of Oregon's tribes or tribe representatives or anyone within the state who's doing work with tribes. And that's concerning to me.
I guess for me is as we are, having discussions around, rolling back provisions that were created to protect, the population, including, vulnerable communities. My biggest concern is that we may be moving too quickly without looking at the whole picture. I'm thinking of specifically workplace provisions that protects farm workers, including workers that work in seafood processing. I'm looking at the vaccine data, and when we talk about Latinos, when we talk about farm workers, I don't think we're close to the 70% of people being vaccinated. That number is much lower, and I'm just afraid that lifting these critical provisions that will protect people that have been impacted the most could cause a lot of issues. And so it's something that I have in the back of my mind. I think that we need to ensure that as we lift in these provisions, we need to ensure that what protections are we continuing to put in place to ensure that we're protecting those that have been impacted the most.
Just an overall point of view, we have seen EJ in Oregon march toward land use this year. Chair Howell's discussion raises that point. That is land use. It's what happens in big states with much bigger cities. And as as you engage with these issues, you hit land use. It's very complicated. A lot of lawyers don't know it. And even if they did, it wouldn't matter because it's very political. And so that's a good sign. That's a very powerful stakeholder group of finance, real property, insurance, very powerful stakeholder group. And the legislation, that community-driven legislation to the Department of Land Conservation and Development, was hitting directly at land use. It got funneled to a citizen engagement strategy, which is one way that EJ advances toward land use through that engagement. But we can have all the capacity we want, all that you ever dream of. And if you don't get private property and land use, you're not moving the dial enough for climate change. So I just wanted to make that observation and encourage that energy to go forward. I think Oklahoma is one example, but there are many others that really don't hit the radar on it. And I just wanted to share that observation. Even though it's complicated, it's still land. So we can take that approach with our communities. It will really drain our communities to just participate, and not get a solid example. You know, land is a solid example. So we're moving in the right direction, but it will engage adversarial processes a little more, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, the only other thing I have in mind is I know that this legislative session has been a ton of bills advocating for racial justice. There's been a bunch of EJ bills. It's just like the amount of bills I've seen this year who are really trying to push the needle in the dial, push the needle in the right direction is incredible. A lot of those bills have failed. This morning, a bunch of bills already died, which is disappointing. But still, I don't think I've seen this amount of bills for EJ, for racial justice, for gun legislation, a number of issues. I think the pandemic has really lit a fire under legislators, which I'm excited about. And at the same time, there's work that can be done outside of the session when it comes to rulemaking in the fall, when it comes to helping begin to sow the seeds of legislation. Amir, I know that we did that briefly with the EJTF bill, but hopefully we have a chance, this upcoming year to do the same. I think there are some issues that the EJTF has seen over and over again. And as an opportunity, I feel like not just in the short session, but also in the next long session, right? If we plan it right, to really think about what are some of the things that is important to the EJTF and how can we, as a group and also as people who have access to state agencies, how can we just make our priorities clear and priorities known? Because there's issues that we've been talking about for years, right? We've been talking about farm worker protections for years. We've been talking about water quality issues for years. There's a number of issues that continue to pop up. But one of the ones that I continue to think about, especially as we hit this pandemic, that isn't necessarily an obvious EJ issue, but this year there's a bunch of bills for energy democracy. So we had House Bill 2475, which is really historic, finally allowing a low-income utility rate to be implemented. House Bill 2842, which was supposed to, make sure that we have essential home upgrades for renters and homeowners. And then the really exciting one, 2021, 100% clean, which, would beat out any other state by 5 years in terms of its target for 100% clean from utilities. That came out of Ways and Means this morning, which is great, right? I'm glad we're talking about energy, but one of the things we haven't talked about in depth, but I know that that's been a priority for the governor, has been access to internet. I think, especially right now in the pandemic, our most vulnerable community members, before the pandemic, really relied on networks of mutual aid, neighbors, family, friends. But the pandemic really took that away from a lot of people. And a lot of folks were sort of left isolated and unable to connect with the outside world, connect with their families. And those who did, risked their lives. So I was pushing for a lot of our rural communities, some of our low-income communities, BIPOC communities. Access to internet has been difficult. So yeah, in the future, it'd be nice to hear, Amir, from some sort of state agency or from you or from the governor's office about, either efforts that have happened to increase access to people's internet. I don't think there was an investment a few months ago into trying to get rural communities better access to internet. But, I'd love to see us do what Japan did, which is just make the internet a utility, right? Make it a regulated utility, but there's less in the hands of private businesses and, something that's treated like the PUC, right? And the same goes for cell phone service. So that's something that I think cities like Detroit have looked into, of getting better control over their internet and cell phone services, because it's essential, especially as we continue down the shaky road of the pandemic and then potentially face the big earthquake, right? What's going to happen to our internet and sort of communication infrastructure if that happens? How do we make sure that folks are able to communicate with each other? So this is all part of, general essential services for Oregonians, but also feels like the right path to talk about disaster preparedness,
Yeah, maybe just to add a little bit to that, because as my mind is kind of seeing things, I'm seeing more competition for limited resources. When we look at the water issues, water is going to become a commodity that I believe is going to be bought and sold on the markets in a while, because it is becoming so precious, and water is the key to life. And I see us as a task force possibly getting more involved as struggles occur or competition occurs for these limited resources, we will see those less able to represent themselves being put at a distinct advantage to those that have money to hire lawyers and politicians and whatnot to advocate on their behalfs, which might not necessarily be on the behalf of those that can't represent themselves or hire lawyers. And I think, as Valentine mentioned, a lot of these decisions, the pandemic has laid bare many of the inequities. In our rush to fix those inequities, the long-term consequences of that, I am not sure how well they are being looked at, studied, or possibly tried to be mitigating. As they say, every good deed goes unpunished. And I think we may be looking at some unintended consequences for some of the things that have occurred or are going to occur. So maybe we as a group need to maybe look at some of these things and say, okay, in 5 years, what do we see possibly down the road here? And I know nobody has the crystal ball to see what's going to happen ahead, but maybe for us to try to do a little bit of forward thinking. And I know later we'll talk a little bit about our strategic plan and our evolution and where that might leave us. And that might be a better place to take this discussion and go on. But I just see us in the next couple of years coming up on some tough times for these competition of these resources. Thanks.
Anyone else? Amir, do you have any thoughts about any issues we brought up or anything the governor's office or that you know or have done or will do around these issues?
Yes. all these are very important emerging issues, and they're very hefty, like they're very meaty. So I was taking a couple of quick notes about, maybe some presentations to address some of those issues, particularly from governor staff and agency staff for each of these at our next big meeting in August. So we can definitely work on that. And just a quick response to your comment about internet, Joel. Yes, the governor is pushing for broadband infrastructure and making sure that we're getting that type of infrastructure, especially in rural areas where it's disconnected and there's not really any of that. I am trying to think about where you all could plug in on these issues. I think some of them could have formal tables being set or abilities to give input. And I think this is really great to get your voices heard. Quinn, I saw your letter about the Idaho situation, and things like that are continuously evolving. So I was thinking, like, how do I, as your staff, like, continue to keep you all updated about the things you care about, besides meeting like 4 times a year, because things move quickly, and this is part of your work, part of your passion. Yes. And a lot of it sounds like, is centered on energy and climate and infrastructure. So I'm wondering if where's the opportunity to elevate that and embed your concerns and the concerns you're hearing from community members to make sure the state is on track with that and investing where it should be.
My hope, right, is if 286 passes, we will have more support to engage deeper, and also to have, more support to track these things. I know, Amir, you have a lot on your plate, which also includes the EJTF. So yeah, I think we just need more backup, right? Because all of us have other things we're doing, other things we're trying to figure out, and I think it could be, if we have more support, it'd be easier to engage because we have someone. We'd have you and then someone else. Hopefully, they would help us get plugged in, right? So if there's something happening, they could say, "Hey, we've got this event, or we've got this conversation that we could have with the EJTF," right? And then we'd be able to find a way to engage in a deeper way, because I think that's just part of it. And as Bob has mentioned before, we're all volunteers on the EJTF, and all have a lot of other things that we're up to, and it's difficult sometimes to engage,
Yeah, that's true. And I, honestly feel bad. This is one of my favorite parts of my job, is working with you all and trying to figure out like where to connect you with the state. Like that's what, in a lot of ways, environmental justice is all about, right? Like that connection between government and bureaucracy can be full of like red tape and wonkiness with the community and concerns that are happening. And so we can talk about this a little bit later once we go over the strategic plan, but I don't think Senate Bill 286 is going to make it across the finish line in its current form, but there may be opportunities to still achieve some of the goals that were set out in that bill.
Hey, Hui.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning. We were just talking about emerging issues, just things that folks had on their minds that they wanted to share out that we could potentially cover in future EJ sessions. So we talked about land backs, infrastructure for internet and cell phones, more energy democracy stuff, protection for workers. So if you have anything that is on your mind that could be an emerging issue that either your OPO is dealing with, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Hui Ong, Executive Director of OPO Environmental Justice Oregon, and that we're being recorded. He, him. We'd be curious about any federal piece of work that we could be engaged in. OPO is trying to balance and trying to figure out our role in addressing some of the federal dollars that can come into both some of the infrastructure, and we're supportive of the Thrive agenda as an organization. It's a very interesting demand of a $10 billion investment into frontline communities and first responders, but then also in that there's a pretty big demands around transportation, which is a big area that we are interested in. So just holding the space to talk about federal work. I know this is not the body that might do that, but organizationally, I think it'll be of interest for folks, as there's lots of pretty deep investments being hashed out right now.
Thanks, Hui. And I know we had one of our senators come in, I think it was Merkley, yeah? Yeah, Merkley came by and talked to us about some national EJ stuff. But as Hui mentioned, I know that there's been a massive shift in talking about national stuff again, since we no longer have a federal administration that isn't willing to play ball. But now we have a federal administration that's having to do a lot of cleanup, and it's just inundated with stuff. But there are some national networks that are working on a Green New Deal, that are working on trying to make significant investments in transportation infrastructure. We also have the chair of transportation and infrastructure here in our backyard, right? Peter DeFazio's a longtime congressman and is pretty in tune and in touch with what's going on. So yeah, we have opportunities here to make a difference. So yeah, I too would love to see if there's a way for EJTF to engage deeper in some national issues, especially if it aligns with some of what Governor Brown is already advocating for with our federal delegation, Mira. That'd also be something I think would be super valuable for EJTF if there's stuff that y'all are pushing for with the feds. We'd love to help out in any way we can.
If I could jump in on that a little bit, the past 6 months with President Biden has been very progressive in my mind. And there seems to be a lot of attention on environmental justice and equity, and making sure that the federal government is responding to underserved communities now. So I just agree with what you were saying, well, about, there may be an opportunity to build in those connections more. And Hui, that's awesome and amazing. I've been in a couple of meetings with him, and he's just like incredible. And it definitely is a breath of fresh air for the EPA. So there's a connection there to kind of solidify and build up in the years going forward. That honestly probably hasn't been there before.
Yeah, I believe Administrator Regan is the first Black administrator for the EPA and the second person of color, if I'm correct. So it's a pretty huge step. And the way what they shared in terms of not just the EPA as an agency, but the administration's analysis and incorporation of environmental justice throughout the other agencies, and kind of in their approach, I felt pretty, cautiously optimistic. So excited about their leadership.
I just want to say Lisa Jackson was head of the EPA, and she is an African-American woman.
I'm curious. We haven't heard from Region 10 in a while. I know that sometimes Cheryl Stills comes and sees us, but yeah, now that we've got a new EPA administrator, I'm wondering if it might be time for us to have, a conversation, or, figure out how we can be more involved also, not just on national issues, but in regional issues. Because we've got the national EPA, and then you've got the other sub-regions. And I think we're in Region 10, I want to say, if I remember correctly, but that might be another way too for us to engage, especially since Washington continues to beat us to the punch, right? I look at the bills they pass, and I'm like, man, what are we doing here? What's going on?
Yes, and other states as well. Some surprising states. I think Virginia set up an EJ office last year. And I think there's like another state that's looking at environmental justice on a high level. I can't remember which one it is.
Do our folks have any thoughts about things we chatted about before we move on? Well, thanks y'all for the robust discussion. Get the wheels turning. I know it's been a long session, and we've got a little break coming up, but there's still advocacy work to be done for Oregonians and for EJ. So yeah, I look forward to seeing what other topics we can begin to get our hands on. Amir, could you quickly just give us an update on SB 286? You mentioned it. You don't think it's going to make it through, and I was hoping to hear a little bit about what's going on with that.
Yes. So with the last thing I heard on 286 was that it was scheduled, that it got referred to the Ways and Means Committee, and it has not been scheduled yet. And I believe the legislature is trying to end in the next week or so. Yesterday was the last day that the Joint Subcommittee on Natural Resources met. And so it wouldn't be heard there. If anything, there's a couple of strategies. One could be trying to get it scheduled within the Capital Construction Subcommittee. Another way to reach the goals of the bill are to try to figure out how to get additional resources included in the end of session bill, budget bill.
When Capital Construction is going to meet, if there's anything that you want us as EJTF members to do to try and maybe get it through?
Nothing right now. I'm not sure when Capital Construction is going to meet. I think they're like the last committees to get together. So they actually haven't met this month yet. So there probably might be like 1 or 2 meetings next week. They're meeting at 1 o'clock today, actually.
Okay.
And I don't see it scheduled for today, so it's probably not going there.
Let us know if there's a Hail Mary you have or thinking of
Definitely.
All right, gang, it is 9:52. Let's go on to public comment. Do we have anyone on the attendees list that want to provide public comment? Please raise your hand. Okay. I don't see anybody. In that case, let's we got a break here. Let's take a quick break. Folks want to come back like at 10, and then we'll go on with the rest of our agenda. Thanks, y'all.
Sounds good.
All right, folks, we'll come back. Okay, it is 10:02. We got EJTF business next. The EJTF strategic plan and work plan updates. I'll kick us off, Amira.
Yes. Great. So I am going to share my screen in a moment, but I thought it now might be a good time to review the strategic plan that was put together almost 2 years ago now, and just see where progress has been made and where maybe we need to work on a couple things. I was able to, here we go. I hope everyone can see this.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I was able to pull up the strategic plan that was pulled together with the help from Katie Sawicki a long time ago, with the goals and actions that were taken up. I tried to add in as many details as possible and sort of show where we were in terms of progress. This slide is a little weird, but on the progress side, you'll see where things are either completed, ongoing, or in progress. And then the items that are blank are things that haven't really been worked on at this point. So those are the opportunities for us to do a little bit more work. And I'm sure, as you know, some of this has kind of been riding on the success of passing 286. And some of it has been given a pause because we are in a long legislative session and trying to figure out things. And then there are other items that were dependent on relationship building that are in progress and ongoing, but need to be completed. Does that make sense? Any questions before I dive in? Okay. So goal 1 was to coordinate a statewide assessment of environmental justice issues and communities. This work would have been a part of Senate Bill 286. However, I would say that the scope of the assessment was defined at a very high level to be more of a cumulative impact analysis, environmental vulnerability assessment tool that agencies could use to figure out how their actions were impacting environmental justice communities, where those communities were located, and other potential investments that are needed. The scope of the assessment took into account environmental and social determinants. It also took into account the history of what environmental justice groups have historically been. So BIPOC communities, rural areas, coastal communities as well were kind of included in that definition. So at a very high level, that work was completed. The next one around identifying universities to collaborate with, I think we started to do that work, particularly with Jim's connection to the universities in the LeGrand area. And there's clearly interest in engaging in this work, either with PSU or Willamette as well. Bob, I see your hand up.
Yes, I've been working with U of O with a professor there in terms of EJ and encouraging her involvement in her work in terms of the cultural impacts of things like signage across the University of Oregon. She's encouraged her students to know about us and EJTF. Robin and I have spoken in her class about EJTF. So we're doing some of these things, not at the formal table, but planting those seeds. And she would be a great, Dr. Laura Polito would be a really good asset for us on EJTF also. So I think we're not doing it formally, but it's developing naturally also. So I thought I'd report that back. Thank you, Amira.
Great. I can do edits while we're talking too, if there's something that should be included here.
Maybe if I could with a quick question. About half a year ago, maybe a year in pandemic time, we saw that I believe it was the U of O got a fairly large grant to set up an environmental justice institute. Bob, is that who you're working with, or are we doing any, taking any steps to kind of weave us and them together communication-wise at least?
I have spoken with Dr. Polito about that specifically. Back before anyone knew pandemic was, Robin and I applied for a grant. We were at U of O, and we came pretty close to getting it. It's a meshed university infrastructure with a 58% indirect cost rate on federal grants. So it was impossible to do then because of that. He didn't know much about it. He is the chair of ethnic studies there, and so it's odd she didn't know anything about it. And so I don't know where it's going to go. That money was spread out among 3 universities. 2 I never, to my own ignorance, have never heard of. But no, we're not. In fact, I think she would rather focus on the community, and while being a very prominent professor and chair of the Ethnic Studies Department, but for her research particularly focus on community environmental justice. And she came up recently from Southern California, where she was a national leader in environmental justice. So I'm trying to groom that contact, and I told her expressly that I'm going to mention her name whenever I can in terms of EJTF, and she said, please do. So it's odd. That's a good question, Jim. And she's not seeking that. They're not seeking her. Maybe they're developing some other way of doing that. I'm very curious also, but thanks for the question.
Just want to follow up, Bob, to see if I heard you right. Did you say that the university had a 53 or 54% overhead charge?
It was 58%. It was a federally negotiated indirect cost rate for these types of grants back then. You know, this was probably in the late 90s. And it was a lot to take on. The way we would get around it, maybe they don't do it now, and for people listening that are fundraising for nonprofits, it's a good way to do it, is to break, you'll have an exception for smaller grants, we'll have a smaller indirect cost rate. So you break your big grant down into the smaller grants where you have the smaller, usually 25% indirect cost rate on it. There's no way it costs them that much, but it's been a very big problem raising money for EJ issues in higher education. And there's a long history of National Environmental Justice Advisory Committee having issues with universities' engagements in EJ communities. So we're watching this, and one way to discourage EJ grant fundraising is to have huge indirect cost rates. And so if you can find a lower one, I'm sure there's people shopping for that. Thank you.
Okay, so that sounds like that's a really good opportunity for the task force to connect with universities and leverage those connections. Okay, so going down this list, identifying community partner organizations and identifying government agencies, I feel like that work has been ongoing in terms of the CBOs, because we always want to make sure we're developing and continuing those relationships with community. I would say that identifying government agencies that are relevant to our work has been completed, and it's really exciting to see that this past year, state agencies have really given their full participation and attention to the task force in a variety of different ways, coming to meetings, sharing input and feedback opportunities, and just other things that are happening. And I think I've seen a lot of connections building between you all individually or your organizations and agency folks. So that's really good to see. So I guess the one takeaway from this is we're still missing the analysis portion of this assessment. And we'll probably have to regroup to figure out how that will actually happen. Maybe in partnership with these universities that are doing the research work. Any other questions about this goal?
Yeah, I'll come back. I'll sound like a brokered record a little bit here. But if there's any way we can shake ourselves loose to write our own grants, because I don't see us doing that type of an assessment without funding. We're not going to develop a survey, pre-test it, do focus groups, and then roll it out statewide on our own. I know the words to say, but I don't know the actions or activities that need to be done to get all that work done and out to the public. So I think kind of if 286 doesn't happen, I don't think this survey is going to happen unless we write our own grant. And if I recall in prior discussions, we were told we couldn't do that. So we're in a chicken and the egg situation. We need money to get it done, but if we can't get money, it's not going to get done. So therefore, it's becoming an unrealistic expectation. And I guess, we need to, maybe in our August meeting when the dust settles, figure out what's possible, what's not possible, and then maybe adjust accordingly.
I think that's an excellent point, Jim. There could always be some sort of survey or high level analysis, but it will probably never be to the level that I think you're talking about and that we would all like to see around environmental justice. And you're absolutely right about the limitations for grant writing right now.
I just want to say.
Oh, Bob, I think there you go.
Because, we can't do this, we're going to have 15 natural resource agencies, probably about 5 social welfare agencies, all each expending their capacities on doing some of these things from their slice of the EJ problem. They lose an economy of scale in terms of public policy by having this work focused here, so that while it's not a cookie cutter, it could be a beginning template for a number of state agencies. So I think that it's inevitable that we move in that way, but it's going to be a slower and more expensive one without integrating some of these service needs that we've been talking about.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, moving on to goal 2. This goal was legislative change directly to amend the statute to increase influence and authority of the EJTF. Obviously that process happened because we had 286. So a lot of the action items were completed. One small hole here, well, actually 2 holes here that you'll see that aren't completed, was to develop a campaign plan and to gain buy-in from the advocacy commissions. So with the campaign plan, I think there was a level of agreement on how that was going to happen, how that was going to be pushed. I led like a lot of that, but I probably could have done a better job of like gathering a coalition around this bill a little bit more versus like, oh my gosh, like session is during Zoom and we have to like make things happen. And I hate to blame the pandemic, but I do feel like some of that is, you know, some of the catalysts that hindered us like really just getting together as we normally would, having, you know, similar to other community organization coalitions and building up the strategy better. And then with the advocacy commissions, I would say that and maybe buy-in isn't the right word here. I did not hear that there wasn't support because the section that impacted their influence, I think, was resolved so that they were still a part of the decision-making about who would be their representative. And then we also had a leadership transition with the Advocacy Commission office. And I think that progress also kind of hindered the action around this. I would say one success from this was, even though we didn't have a coalition necessarily, getting in contact with the BIPOC caucus and freshman legislators. I would say we were successful in that. It just probably didn't rise to the top of their priority list. And then, well, that's for like numerous reasons. And then gaining the assistance from stakeholders. So the groups that are based in environmental justice communities, for sure, some of them were able to help and weigh in with the strategy where needed, along with some of the more mainstream environmental partners.
Amir, I just want to jump in. There was Senate concurrent resolution 17 that was passed, as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong. That's a resolution, it's a grassroots piece of legislation that lays down principles of environmental justice. So while, you know, we stirred the pot in terms of our direct legislation, I think at least getting the first Oregon grassroots principles of environmental justice, although individually we might have all known it and pushed it and so forth, but as a task force we did it. But having that suddenly happen for Oregon is a tremendous service that the communities have done us during the time of pandemic. So I just want to, you know, shout out to the community groups that helped get that grassroots statements of Oregon's environmental justice principles for the first time this year.
Yes, that's an excellent point, Bob. And I would say that's probably a success as well. I felt like this session was probably the first session where we're not necessarily trying to help people understand what environmental justice is. And there were a bunch of bills that touched on equity and environmental justice around like energy and transportation and land use and in places that I don't think folks normally think of. So it was really exciting to see that. Any other questions, comments about this goal?
No, I think in the past, I remember a few years ago, my MT gave some funding to some of our community-based partners, like Opal, BT, Beyond Toxics, to do some on-the-ground engagement when the areas that EJTF was going, and that was super valuable. You know, I myself, when I was at Beyond Toxics, which now feels like a lifetime ago, did some on-the-ground engagement with the EJTF, and we do have community-based partners, you know, that are now on the EJTF, which I think is great. And, you know, we've continued to broaden outside of community-based partners. Also, you know, it's lower down in there, even with the advocacy commissions, right? We have Ben, who's now in the Commission on Black Affairs, and, you know, it's been a good strategy. But I think the one thing that has happened in the last 5-ish years, really even the last 4 years, I've seen a massive increased amount of sort of EJ staffing at community-based organizations. Like a few years ago, it was just, you know, Hui and I, and a few other people. And now, like, a lot of folks have EJ positions, right? A lot of other, let's say, these smaller based community-based organizations are beginning to invest in a position here and there. Some large organizations, a larger faction of staff. So as time goes on, I've seen more and more hunger for funding EJ positions. Some of it's touted as climate justice work, but it has a racial justice focus, which makes it EJ. So the landscape is changing. I think most of us here in the call are pretty aware of it. I think it's just a matter of, you know, how do we make sure that we use our space here as EJTF and being an amplifier, sort of a microphone for these groups, right? And inviting them and sort of taking part and inviting them to come and chatting with us. So my hope is that now that we're sort of doing this remote thing, who knows, we're going to be back in person. In some ways, it's easier for folks to engage with EJTF, right? Because we're doing this online versus physically traveling to a place and going through the process of making sure you can attend. So even if we do go back to in person, my hope is that we will continue to keep this remote style of things, right? A hybrid approach, so that folks can engage with us even if they aren't able to physically be there. You know, it doesn't take much to hop on a Zoom real quick and talk to us. So I'm hoping that I don't know what the governor's plans are, Amir, or the state's plan is, you know, as we get closer and closer to reopening, what the online component of things will be.
Yeah, Chair, if I may just interject, I think, you know, your idea of creating various mode of opportunities for people to connect with the EJ task force, it's going to be really critical. And I think, based on the past experiences that we have had with technology, when we have been meeting in other locations outside of Salem, I think we haven't had, we haven't been equipped well enough to be able to do that. But to the extent that we can make that happen, I think that would be great, because, more CBOs would be able to connect with us remotely.
And one thing to follow up on what Joel said, I noticed that in the Public Utility Commission arena, many of the utilities now have diversity, equity, and inclusion positions that I think are more of an outcome of the pandemic and the rate forgiveness that they were doing as they then calculated how to collect the past due rates. But I've noticed that PGE, Portland General Electric, they've got a really, they've ramped up where they have 5 people in that unit now working on things, and they are going out to communities as they look at expansion projects of substations, to the degree of looking at the demographics of the people around the substations. So they look at their upgrades in the communities that have maybe less ability to pay for it. And so they are definitely changing their way that they think about improvements to infrastructure and looking at the DEI components of the neighborhoods that they're looking to go into. So I've been really pretty impressed with how they're moving forward in this arena.
Moving on to goal 3. So this was our goal for community-centered advocacy and providing a platform and pathway for EJ organizations and community to influence and inform policy. Some of this is ongoing and in progress. And then some of it is kind of left off a little bit. So we are continuing to hold meetings in community by virtue of being in Zoom. I think more folks can join, and people are like learning about the task force and everything that you all are talking about. So that has been somewhat successful. Following up on community concerns, I think that is happening where it's possible to follow up. And part of that is done by your own interest in what's going on, or you hear from community where you are and bringing that forth, or sometimes people come and give public comment or present on something and want us to know about what's going on in their area. Providing letters, emails, and I think this is a typo. And to use the website. Let's change that. I think there needs to be an internal process still solidified. That has gotten better with the process of, you all identifying something you want to give input on, a letter being written, and then it goes to governor's office or the powers that be that you're trying to send it to. I think that needs to be just finalized. I know Jim worked really hard on that piece. Striving to ensure language accessibility and physical accessibility, again, with Zoom has helped in some ways make this a more accessible forum. But there are things that we could tweak and change, especially around language or other ADA accommodations. We could definitely do better on that. So that might be something to add to the list of action items. Holding one-on-ones with legislators and developing relationships in education. As I mentioned before, that's kind of ongoing and happening as new legislators join. Sometimes they have an existing connection with one or more of you, and other times it's just curiosity. And I think that's just like ongoing. I know I've had conversations with legislators who wanted to not only learn more about environmental justice, but to also be helpful. Democratic Party of Oregon Summit presentation. I think this was a very specific idea. I want to say this came from Jim, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Oh, maybe not. Okay, I see your head shaking. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to accuse you. But I think that was kind of put on hold due to the pandemic, and there was something that happened where that didn't happen. There could be opportunities for more external presentations about what the task force is all about and how to elevate the work. Developing education materials and concepts. That hasn't happened, along with the EJ 101 to targets in the political world. Well, I'll kind of take that back because I think some of that has happened at the state level. But like we were talking about, it feels like we're beyond the 101. And I don't know if you all want to continue to be the teachers of environmental justice. And if that's something you want to focus on. Coordinating with NGOs who do EJ work with legislators, that's ongoing and in progress. change this to ongoing. Elevating EJTF at the national and international level. Again, pandemic has caused that to be a little bit tricky, but as we just talked about, I think there's opportunity there. And then giving an EJTF Friends Recognition Award. I think this was rooted in acknowledging and recognizing those that have been continuously engaging with the task force. I think this was for agency staff mostly. Bob, I think this was your idea. And I think that's something that could easily be done and achieved now. Any questions about these?
No, I just want to go quickly back to the TPO summit. It happens every 2 years. So last year didn't happen, but it'll most likely happen next year. And I think with time, Amira, we may have an opportunity to present next year, especially as if we do it in a sort of historical context, right? There's been a number of like EJ bills have been presented. Like there's a number of EJ bills this session that have already passed, like the bill on safety outdoors, you know, in terms of hate crimes is an important one. All the energy democracy bills. There are some land use bills that almost passed, right? So I don't think it's super far off to potentially have that presentation next year, whether it be from members or from yourself, Amira, or someone else in the governor's office.
So just going back to the language accessibility, I feel that one thing that we could be doing fairly soon is to translate the EJ Task Force website into Spanish, and also I don't think it would take us that long to translate the agenda in Spanish as well. And hopefully down the road, we can set up a mechanism in place where people who want to provide public comment in their native language would have that opportunity to do it without having them, bring their own interpreter to be able to, relay their concerns to the EJ Task Force.
One other thing on language, Zoom now has a language translation widget that you can add. I know Oregon Rural Action, the group that I work with, has added it. I don't know how good it works, but I could check on that, because now when I set up meetings, I see I have that toggle switch to enable translation. So that's a feature that might be, well, tell you what, I'll look into it and get back to folks to let you know what it costs and how well it works. One other thing, to go back to what Joe was talking about with the Democratic Party presentation, I think to be bipartisan, we should also look at a Republican counterpart if they have something similar. Because I know when I work with my folks out here, they kind of laugh at EJ, and you have to explain to them what that means. Those words, environmental justice, conjure up a different meaning in a county commissioner or a rancher. And I think educating folks as to what the meaning is in a more maybe traditional sense, unpacking the words, I found that to be helpful. When I do that, people go, oh yeah, I get that, that's good. But environmental justice out here with ranchers, the wolf issue, all that kind of stuff, it doesn't necessarily conjure up good images. So we kind of need to add the, all political parties and structures to our educational processes.
I think that's an excellent point. Just quickly going back to the language thing, I think that would be good to look into I'm part of another commission and they do have translation services available, but I think it's because they have an interpreter as well. So that would be useful to figure out. If it's just something you add on and it like translate, like the computer translates, or if it's someone that's hired to translate in real time.
Yes, we just had a Mesoamerican language conference on Wednesday, and we had several interpreters through that function. One was interpreting in Spanish, the other one in English. And also we provided interpreters in a couple of the Mesoamerican languages that communities speak in Oregon. I think Quiche and Mom was the two languages. And based on what we heard, all four interpreters were interpreting simultaneously, and so people had the option to choose which language they would prefer to listen the conference in.
Okay, I already signed Jim and Valentine to be part of that.
Yeah, and part of the
Okay,
reason, and part of the reason I'm bringing this up is because we haven't had many people. At least I like to see more people be engaged in our meetings. And why is it that people are not participating? And I feel like part of it has to do with language accessibility. And so I think that is extremely critical if we want to be open and have this platform opportunity for people to bring up their concerns.
Okay. Any other comments about this goal? All right. And then moving on to the last one, goal 4 was to ensure accountability. This is internal and external as well. By creating a framework that builds an accountability for both the governor's office as well as EJTF. Some of these have been completed. One thing that would be good to do is to build out a plan for improved community communication and dissemination of information. I think the language accessibility connects with that. Identifying a process for prioritizing community concerns. So some of this is ongoing because what I've noticed is that either the governor's office will hear about something separately, and then the task force members hear something separately. And sometimes community members come to these meetings to voice their concerns. And so I would say the community concerns are being addressed, but there's not necessarily a formal process of how that works together. Yeah, and identifying a more solid process to build in communication with governor, legislative body, et cetera. I think that is also ongoing in the same vein. Documentation around agendas, packets, strategies, any other needed materials. That has, I think, vastly improved. Please correct me if I'm wrong, and we can still work on it, but I think that one's completed. Review of reporting requirements, evaluations, including governmental or non-governmental agencies. I couldn't quite remember what exactly this one was trying to get at, so I left it blank. Reporting requirements, expectations, and communications of reports. That's been really good. I think last year was one of the first years that we got a report from every single agency. And communicating that out so that agencies could use that in the public could use that to see like where there's progress being made. Participation and engagement with the EJTF. As I mentioned earlier, there has been that full participation from agency staff. I'm wondering if Zoom has helped like alleviate some of that time, because you know, like it takes less travel time to get together. And then trainings and education for EJ. This one gave me pause too, because I wasn't exactly sure what I couldn't remember what the reasoning was behind that. I see Valentine off mute and Powell.
Go ahead, Valentine.
I guess I just want to take a moment and to thank all of the natural resource agencies for submitting their annual report. I know that you know, while I wasn't one of the founders of the EJTF task force, but I know that Bob and Julie Samples have talked about the limited participation, and I think we have come a long way. So I just want to take a moment to thank them for doing that.
I also think from my recollection of review reporting requirements and evaluations, I think that was on there because Jason Milner had put out kind of a memo for how to structure the reports, but I don't think everybody was following that format. So I think our intent there was we have a format, and let's try to encourage folks to use that format when reporting back. And I think that's been accomplished as I look at most of the reports.
Thank you.
Sorry to go backwards, Mira, but I just popped into my head. I know I've seen people who do ASL on some of the events with the governor's office or with the governor. Is that something that's becoming more standard practice? Do y'all have contractors for that sort of thing? And then as well as for language interpretation, I know like this year's the first year that the legislature is providing language interpreters, right? Versus before, you know, I can't tell you how many times I've interpreted for community members during session, but I know that that's been an investment the legislature has made. Is that something that's open to, you know, like the EJTF advocacy commissions, so that now that there's staff, you know, that is providing interpretation for community members and ASL?
I could look into that. I've only seen the ASL interpreters for like the governor's announcements related to like COVID and like her media and press events. I'm not sure how available those are, but that's something to look into.
Okay, thank you. And then Jim brought up the interpretation through Zoom. We use it all the time. It works great. It's just a matter of having a good interpreter, and then making sure that community members know how to just click the little globe icon, right, when they hop into Zoom. But no, it works great.
Okay, maybe that's something, once we figure that out, that can be built into the next big meeting. Okay, and that's kind of it with this. I'm going to stop sharing my screen if there aren't any questions about the items that you see here. And so the next steps for that is for me to take the goals and remove the things that have been completed. So they're not taking up space, and just put that in a separate document so we can say like, okay, like, did we do this? Yes, we did that. And then sending that back out to you all, and then maybe figuring out action items and next steps, and who can give their time to help with some of the items. Does that sound like a good plan? Okay. Let me know if you want me to do anything else with that or do more. All right, and I think that's it for that section. I'll turn it back over to you, Joel. And I do see an attendee with their hand up, Alfredo Harrow. I can bring them over.
Good.
Hi, I'm Alfredo Aro. I'm a public policy intern with Office of Civil Rights at ODOT. I did have a question about, so there was discussion on like translation services and public forums. And is there like a best practices guide for how to hold these hearings? And in terms of accessibility and language access, anything that you may have knowledge on?
I can try to answer some of that. So I think what you're talking about, what you're asking for is different from the best practices handbook that the task force put together, and more about like best practices on having virtual public meetings and forums, right? I don't think there is one specific thing that's put together. I think there was interest in developing that in the beginning of last year when all this was going down. But that did not happen, at least at the state level that I know of.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for being with us, Alfredo. I'm curious, what are there, if you could share with us, what are some of the things you're working on over at ODOT?
Well, it was exactly that, actually, putting together like a facts paper to share with the rest of the offices, to just kind of some things to do in our virtual meetings, such as making sure the translation and interpretation services and what platforms to use. From kind of my search, Zoom has probably some of the best interpretation or transcription services compared to other telecommunication software. So yeah, just kind of wanted to ask questions to other people and gather knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Alfredo. If you want to know more, you can shoot an email to Amira and she can get you in contact with us. There are folks on the call that have done this type of thing, and Valentin and myself certainly have experience. Opal does as well. So feel free to contact Amira and shoot us an email. We'd be happy to help you out.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, gang. It is 10:50. We are almost done. I think the only other thing we have left is talking about engagement with advocacy commissions. We covered it briefly, Amira, but I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to chat about in terms of advocacy commission stuff.
Yeah, so we have a couple of vacancies for the Commission on Asian Affairs, the Indian Services Commission, and potentially the Commission on Hispanic Affairs. So I'm I think it would be really helpful to coordinate with one or two of you to set up a meeting with Albert Lee and try to get on the calendars for those commissions to give a pitch for, someone to step up and volunteer to be on the bodies. We have been kind of holding off on vacancies because of the bill. But yeah, we still need to get those filled at some point. And Joel, I know you expressed interest before. If you want to help with that, again, that would be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, especially now that session's wrapping up, I'll have a little more bandwidth to engage with the advocacy commissions. I know they're around the time they're going to start to meet right now. I've been getting some notices for different meetings. I also know they have their annual sort of convening between all of them. So that might be a good opportunity as well to do a much deeper history and update on who the EJTF is, what we've done, what we're up to. That way we can feed 4 birds with 1 seed,
That sounds good. So maybe I'll send an email between you, me, and Albert to set that up and get some time on their calendars. Do you know when the annual meeting is?
I want to say the fall. I think they meet all together in the fall. Like I said, now that session's wrapping up and things aren't so hectic in the Capitol, folks will have some more bandwidth. So even if it's not at their, regular meeting, it would be nice to be able to set one-on-ones with Albert and then potentially a chair of the advocacy commissions, just to have like a one-on-one conversation and potentially think about what they have on their docket in the upcoming year. I think that's been part of the difficulty of engaging with the advocacy commissions, is that we aren't always super aware of what they're up to and what their priorities are. And I think the same could be said about us, that they're not super aware of what's going on with us and what we're doing. The idea before White was when the EJTF was first formed, was that these liaisons would communicate back and forth. But what ends up happening is that our liaisons are already stretched thin and doing a lot, and they can't always make it to our meetings. And certainly unless we have someone on their commissions, we don't really know what's happening with them. So I think part of it is just reestablishing a line of connection. Now that Albert's there and he has come and seen us and gave us his commitment that he would try to keep more involved and more in communication, I think it'd be great for us to do the same and try and establish some relationships with some of their leadership. So it's not like a once every few years, like, hey, we exist, and more of a ongoing conversation and ongoing check-ins, even if it's, twice a year or once every 3 months, on a quarterly basis would be nice.
Yes, the potential for collaboration is great. Does anyone else want to help? Thanks, Bob. Okay. Well, I think that's all I had. I'm going to hand it back to you, Chair.
The other thing too, the great strategy that's been used is, Ben sort of dropped off as EJTF chair and then hopped over to the Commission on Black Affairs. I'm not saying that other folks should do that on here, but it's a potential strategy. Like as time goes on, I myself have thought about and considered, well, what if I drop off here and join the Commission on Hispanic Affairs and then, hop back in? I think part of it is just that some of the folks we've had aren't super in touch with EJ. And so it's been difficult for them to engage, but it's just something to consider as we move forward and think about additions to EJTF and additions to the advocacy commissions is, are there people out there that can fulfill both roles and have the bandwidth to do so. I think a lot of it's just choosing the right person.
I know the EJTF has had some real intentions for have some regional representation. Is that alignment also something that the commissions are also trying to engage in terms of their recruitment and building out of their commissions? I wanted to see if, I think we have oftentimes, for me anyways, some relationships with the Portland metro area, but I also want to make sure that, right, the commissions also help recruit and engage a broader community regionally. And if that's the same alignment we have, I just want to make sure that if I'm helping recruit for the commissions that can also do the double duties, that I don't misstep and recruit, kind of the Portland metro area kind of reps that we know. I don't know if Amira or others that have that experience kind of know if the commissions actually have that same alignment in terms of regional representation.
Are you asking if they're trying to be more regional focused?
I know EJTF really wants, when they're looking for folks to join, to have that regional representation, which is super helpful for, right? I want to know if the commissions also have that same type of directive to recruit onto the commission from a broad range. So then if we end up having someone that's from a commission that ends up regionally mostly from the Portland metro area, like not duplicating that dynamic that might not be helpful for us as an EJTF.
Got it. Yeah, that is a really great point, and part of the reason I think we were trying to change it so that they could be like, yes, this is my rep versus like I'm on both things. But yes, I think they are dealing with the same concern with their commissions being a little bit more Portland or Portland metro region focused, and I know they're trying to get more regional diversity. We kind of do that too a little bit. I think most folks are stretched out. Hui and Quinn, I think you're the only Portland folks with us today. Valentine, I forgot where you live.
Yeah, I live at McMinnville, and we move our Hillsborough farmer office to Gresham now.
Yeah. But that's also an excellent point.
That's good to know, though. I mean, yeah, no, you're right. Who, like, I'm not sure. I know before Albert was there, when we talked to the previous staffer, they certainly talked about like having broad representation in the state, but I don't know if it was an explicit, like, we're really going to try and do this. I mean, I know there's a new appointment person in the governor's office. So that might be a question for them too. Like, what are the criteria that they're looking at when it comes to appointments, right? And is there an explicit commitment to making sure there's regional representation, as well as diversity when it comes to people's backgrounds, but also professional experience? So I'd love to hear more about that. If you know, or if that person can come and chat with us about what they're looking for when it comes to appointments.
Yeah, absolutely. Our executive appointments director is Shion Kim, and she's amazing. I'm sure she would love to come and talk to you about that.
Because she does appointments for the advocacy commissions as well, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love to have her come by and talk to us about sort of her role and what other commissions she's appointing for. Because I'm unsure of what all she does. I know that she appoints for us, but outside of that, like, who does she make appointments for? There's a ton of commissions some within the governor's office, some outside of it. I know there's like Commission on Disabilities, there's Commission on right, the 4 advocacy commissions, but there's also a bunch of other commissions as well that are in the background that we don't really have a connection with. But again, like I would love to have a stronger relationship with the Commission on Disabilities, because it is that community does severely suffer from environmental racism and other climate justice issues. So, you know, as we continue on with our work, it'd be nice to be more connected with some of the other commissions and make sure that we're hearing about their issues and it's informing us, but at the same time, like, you know, also hearing about what kind of people are wanted in these positions and needed. So
Yeah, yes. So Sheehan directs all of the executive appointments for the governor's office, absolutely, and that's basically the state. And then the policy advisors help like recruit for whatever policy area they're in. For example, my colleague Jackie Yerby has quite a few commissions and boards under her belt, and she does the work to recruit and then works with Sheehan to make sure we're being responsive and that the commissions and boards are representing the broader community and public.
it's good to know. Yeah, Jackie's great. Again, it's 11:02. We'll just do some closing comments from EJTF members, and then we'll get on with the rest of our days. I just wanted to kick us off real quick. Thank you all for being here yesterday and today. I know it's been a really hectic legislative session. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. Just a reminder that we're still in a pandemic. I know that we're getting closer and closer to folks being vaccinated, and I hope to see you all very soon in person one day again so we can share physical space with each other. I also wanted to take the opportunity to recognize that some folks are already observing Juneteenth. It's really great that the federal government has finally recognized Juneteenth, but it's also not enough just to recognize a day, right? We need real structural change in laws and practices that support not just Black Oregonians, Black Americans. So while this is a step in the right direction, there's a lot more work that needs to be done by us, by the legislature, by the federal government. So yeah, but this is nonetheless a small but significant win. And I'll pass it to Bob.
EJ is a force of nature. To get to where we've gotten, we've been in many moments like this, where great pioneering, wonderful steps have put forward, but rejected by the power structure for the first time. We'll be back again. We like to follow Washington in a lot of things, but it's a force of nature. The better we understand nature, the more the millennial, broadly speaking, generation really zeroes in on cumulative impacts, the more it will seem to them it was strange that we didn't act sooner. So it's a force of nature, and it inevitably will come back, and it's the responsiveness of our government to respond to that, and they have, and we have. So I look forward to the next round.
Thanks, Bob. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, when I came on board to the EJ task force, I was still trying to figure out how occupational and environmental health was connected to environmental justice. And as I've been participating more and more in our meetings and learning from all of you, it seems clear to me that environmental justice, is connected to many occupational issues that farm workers are facing, like heat stress, like wildfire smoke, like inadequate housing provided by the employer or substandard housing conditions. And so, and I would also add pesticide exposure, how pesticide applied in the workplace impacts the lives of those, the work and also their family members. And I think that one thing that I like is that we have been adding more meetings in between our quarterly meetings. And I think even though they may be just 60 minutes, and even though we may be adding more meetings to our days, I think those meetings are extremely critical and important. So I hope that we can continue to do those meetings post COVID-19.
Well, I think, I'm feeling more optimistic than I have in many years. I know there was a dark shadow over a lot of, a dark shadow. How do I say this without mentioning names? But there was, I think, a dark shadow over the country, and the pandemic amplified that and showed a lot of the inequities. But as I talk to people, people are talking about post-pandemic and having a new slate to develop, to write on how do we move forward now. And I think a lot of people are seeing opportunities to correct past inequities. And that makes me hopeful. And this administration is also pushing in that direction. Their language, their credulity, their wanting to reach out, even though they may not get what they want, but they continue to reach out rather than lash out. And I think that paradigm change can be helpful if we can help integrate that into all the people that we work with. And I know that's what I try to do in my little thing, person to person, trying to speak positively, trying to look at the glass is half full, it's not half empty. So we need to create optimism, because this next year is going to be hard. And I think that's why I love being with this group, because it takes my mind and puts it into other places. While I can't walk in your shoes, I can hear about your walk. And a lot of the times I don't have that opportunity living in Eastern Oregon. So I think, we're on a new future. We just need to make sure that we keep on rolling that rock up the hill. But hopefully the slope of the hill is getting less and less.
Anyone else want to go? Hui, Amira?
Just some brief comments. I appreciate you all, and hopefully you all get a chance to celebrate and do some intentional engagement in celebration of the recognition of Juneteenth this weekend. OPAL is actually closed today as an organization. We actually have our offices closed, but as the executive director, sometimes you still got to show up for some calls. But I'm glad we made that commitment with the workers and our team to recognize it, and we shared some opportunities for folks to both learn about the history, but also to engage in local efforts and strategies. So just thankful to be part of this team. And I'm excited about the direction we're heading, and a little bit bummed about some of our legislative priorities and kind of some of those roadblocks. But I think figuring out a deeper way to engage both this task force and community-based organizations and EJ orgs and communities, I think can be very fruitful in our addressing maybe in the short session or following the special session later on this year. So we'd love to think through with this team what that could look like.
You got anything you want to say, Amira?
Just a couple of things. I love working with you all too. And this is, some of the most rewarding part of my work in the governor's office. Super excited that Juneteenth is tomorrow. I'm kind of sad that it's on a Saturday. Like, can't really take it off right now. And then I also wanted to share some information. You may have heard about the passing of our dear LaWanda Manning, Senator Manning's wife and other half. And I just wanted to let you all know about that, especially if you haven't heard. Senator Manning has been a real champion for environmental justice and for this group. And although they're not asking for anything, but you can submit a donation to the Oregon Food Bank. I think the Eugene chapter on her behalf. And I'm happy to share that information after this meeting as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Amira. I found out about it last Friday when she passed, and I'm proud to say that Senator Manning is my senator here in Eugene, and LaWanda's always and Senator Manning have always supported me and sort of my leadership. I met LaWanda and Senator Manning when I was 23, I think. I'm 30 years old now, so it's been a while since I've known them. And yeah, they've always been really supportive of EJ, of community members. For those of you who can and would like, LaWanda Manning's Celebration of Life is next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Here in Eugene. If folks are interested in making the trek, I'll be attending. But if Bob or anyone else would like to come down and pay their respects, I'm happy to send them the follow-up information. But thanks for the reminder, Amira. Yeah, no. She was chair of the Commission on Black Affairs as well. So we lost a titan. Yeah. All right, folks, it is 11:13. You get 45 minutes back in your day. So chill out, hang out, and we'll see y'all soon. Thanks, everybody.